2. Swearing and revolution. The third commandment once had central attention in church and society. Today, its significance has waned greatly for modern man. Even in such a work as Rand's Digest of the Divine Law, there is no mention of this commandment other than a listing of it in the Table of 10, and a brief citation later. On the other hand, the champions of swearing are increasingly in evidence, as witness the work of an anthropologist, Ashley Montague, in defense of swearing. Montague's informative study gives us a frank statement of the meaning of swearing. Quote, "Swearing serves clearly definable social as well as personal purposes. A social purpose? But has not swearing always been socially condemned and proscribed? It has, and that is precisely the point, because the early forms of swearing were often of a nature regarded as subversive of social and religious institutions, as when the names of the gods were profanely invoked. Their use in such a manner was strictly forbidden." End quote. An important point is made here. False swearing is somehow linked with subversion. We shall return to this later. Swearing is not a universal phenomenon. It is not found among American Indians, Japanese, Malayans, and most Polynesians. The examples Montague gives of its existence among other peoples, as the Aborigines of Australia, represent not theistic swearing, but swearing as filthy speech, and there is a marked difference between the two. Montague has an interesting classification of the various forms of quote-unquote swearing. Quote, "Swearing is the act of verbally expressing the feeling of aggressiveness that follows upon frustration in words possessing strong emotional associations. Cursing, often used as a synonym for swearing, is a form of swearing distinguished by the fact that it invokes or calls down some evil upon its object. Profanity, often used as a synonym for swearing and cursing, is the form of swearing in which the names or attributes of the figures or objects of religion are uttered. Blasphemy, often identified with cursing and profanity, is the act of vilifying or ridiculing the figures or objects of religious veneration. Obscenity, a form of swearing that makes use of indecent words and phrases. Vulgarity, a form of swearing that makes use of crude words, such as bloody. Euphemistic swearing, a form of swearing in which mild, vague, or corrupted expressions are substituted for the original strong ones." End quote. This classification is, of course, non-biblical in orientation. There is, first of all, a prohibition only of false swearing or false cursing. It is taking the name of the Lord in vain or quote-unquote profanely, Berkeley version, that is forbidden. Clearly, not all swearing or cursing is forbidden. Second, from the biblical perspective, all false swearing or cursing is profane, and thus profanity is not a separate category. The word profane comes from the Latin pro, before, fanum, temple, that is, before or outside the temple. Profanity is thus all speech, action, and living which is outside God. Profanity thus includes filthy speech, false swearing and cursing, and also polite and courteous speech and action which is outside God and which does not recognize His sovereignty. Third, only one kind of deserved cursing cannot be permitted. In cursing, a man invokes the judgment of God upon an evildoer. But however evil one's parents may be, and however deserving of judgment, no man may curse his father or mother. In fact, he that curseth or revileth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Exodus 21:17. Honor to parents is so fundamental to godly society that not even in extreme cases can the son or daughter curse either parent. Children must obey their parents. Adults are simply required to honor them. They may, and sometimes must, disagree with them, but to curse them is to violate a fundamental principle of order and authority. Fourth, blasphemy is more than taking the name of God profanely. It is defamatory, wicked, and rebellious language directed against God. Psalm 74:10-18, Isaiah 52:5, Revelation 16:9, 11, and 21. It was punishable by death, Leviticus 24:16. Naboth was falsely accused of blasphemy, 1 Kings 21:10-13, as was Stephen, Acts 6:11, and Jesus Christ, Matthew 9:3, 26:65-66, and John 10:36. Quote, "Blasphemy against the Holy Spirit consisted in attributing the miracles of Christ, which were wrought by the Spirit of God, to satanic power." Matthew 12:22-32, Mark 3:22-30, end quote. Montague points out that according to the law, quote, "in England and in every one of the United States, it is still a legal offense to swear," end quote. Such laws are rarely enforced now. In recent years, women, once not normally associated with profanity, have become increasingly addicted to it. During World War II, in one aircraft factory where many women were employed, a notice read, "No swearing. There may be gentlemen about." On the other hand, Montague points out while in the slums of English towns extreme profanity and obscenity can be heard among women, it is, quote, "seldom if ever encountered in a civilized English village in which the taboos upon bad language of any kind still remain Victorian in their rigor," end quote. It is interesting to note that there is some hostility of late to profanity in the Soviet Union. Profanity does have associations with social disorientation and deterioration. To analyze now a few basic facts with respect to swearing, it must be noted first that forbidden swearing is essentially and necessarily linked to religion. It is profanity outside God and against God. It represents, where the name of God is involved, an illicit and hostile use of God's name, or a dishonest use thereof. Much of the primitive and modern swearing cited by Montague is obscenity rather than profanity. Primitive swearing, as well as modern, invokes sexual and excremental words and subjects. This is a significant fact. In order to appreciate its significance, let us review a few of the central facts. Godly oath-taking is a solemn and important religious act. Man aligns himself under God and in conformity to his righteousness to abide by his word, even as God abides by his word. Godly swearing is a form of vow-taking. But ungodly swearing is a deliberate profanation of the purpose of the oath or vow. It is light use of it, a contemptuous use of it, to express contempt for God. But ungodly swearing cannot remain merely negative or hostile. It denies God as the ultimate, but it must posit another ultimate in God's place. Godly oaths seek their confirmation and strength from above. Ungodly swearing looks below for its power. Its concept of the quote-unquote below is Manichaean to the core. It is material. Hence, ungodly swearing finds its power, its below, in sex and in excrement. The association is significant. Even while protesting the quote-unquote Puritanism of biblical morality, the ungodly reveal that to them sex and excrement are linked together as powers of the underworld of the unconscious, the primitive, and the vital. The direction of profanity is thus progressively downward. After the middle of the 20th century, a new profane word gained popularity, apparently, quote, "an American Negro invention," end quote, whose blunt fact was mother incest. The term actually gained some quote-unquote honorific senses. Since then, other profane words having reference to homosexuality have become more popularly used. The references to other perversions have also increased. In brief, the direction of profanity is progressively downward. When the religion of the triune God is denied, the religion of revolution, the cults of chaos, take over. Vitality, power, and force are seen as coming from below. Profane language seeks to be forceful, and the forceful is that which is below. Second, as is already apparent, there is a religious progression in profanity. It moves from a defiance of God to an invocation of excrement and sex, and then perverted forms of sex. This religious progression is social as well as verbal. The profane society invokes not God, but the world of the illicit, the obscene, and the perverted. What it invokes in word, it also invokes in act. The downward trend of society is a quest for renewed energy, the shock of new force and vitality, and it is a perpetual quest for new profanations. White men will go to a colored prostitute for, quote, a change of luck, end quote. That is, to renew their vitality and power to prosper for a time. By quote-unquote going down, they are recharged in order to quote-unquote go up. Verbal profanity is an oral witness to a social profanity. As the verbal profanity delves downward, so does society in its actions. This means, therefore, that third, profanity is a barometer. It is indicative of revolution in process. It is an index to social deterioration and degeneration. The psychological significance of profanity is not lost on a revolutionary age. Profanity is championed with evangelical fervor. It should surprise no one that a dictionary of slang and profanity was widely promoted as an invaluable reference work for high school libraries in the early 1960s. True education involves, for a profane world, an integration downward into the void, to use Cornelius Van Til's apt phrase. Knowledge of God is barred from the schools, but knowledge of profanity is encouraged. Revolution is invited and encouraged in a society which seeks an integration downward, and profanity is an index, a barometer, of this revolutionary integration downward. Fourth, we can now recognize why, in Montague's words, quote, the early forms of swearing were often of a nature regarded as subversive of social and religious institutions, end quote. They still are. All swearing is religious, and false swearing represents a subversive drive in society. We saw earlier that some societies, like the Aborigines of Australia, have no theistic swearing, but that their swearing is simply filthy language, excremental and sexual in content. In such a society, such swearing is not subversive, since the society is already, by its total character, regressive and on a low level. But when such swearing assumes major proportions and constitutes literary and artistic realism in Western society, it is subversive, and it is religious. Montague's interesting study is also a religious work. He finds health in such profanity, and we must remember that health and salvation, Latin salus, salve, health, are the same words. The wit and scholarship of his study serve only to heighten his religious purpose. Swearing is a healthy social expression, but when it comes to a knowledge of his motives in desiring this health, or why it constitutes health, he is silent. An interesting point is made by Sir John Harington in his poem Against Swearing, in Epigrams, published in London, quote, some 3 years after his death, end quote. Montague cites this poem for documentation on the development of oaths. In elder times an ancient custom was to swear in weighty matters by the Mass. But when the Mass went down, as old men note, they swear then by the cross of this same groat. And when the cross was likewise held in scorn, then by their faith the common oath was sworn. Last, having swore away all faith and troth, only God damn them is their common oath. Thus custom kept decorum by gradation, that losing Mass, cross, faith, they find damnation. Harington noted the religious progression. The major change has come since then. The commandment declares, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain." Positively, this means thou shalt take the name of the Lord thy God in righteousness and truth. Negatively, it also means thou shalt not take the name of other gods or powers. In each case, the implications are far-reaching.